Good morning, everyone, and thank you for tuning into our webinar today. My name is Brian, and for those of you who don't know about us, we are a government-owned organization in Singapore that invests in and helps to build deep tech startups, talent, and communities. At SGInnovate, our work involves connecting with the global deep tech ecosystem, working with entrepreneurial scientists to bring their innovative research from lab to market, as well as to help develop deep tech talent. Today's event, Key Project Management Skills for a Pharma Industry Career, is presented by SGInnovate and Albany College of Pharmacy and Health Sciences. Today's masterclass will cover topics such as scoping projects, team formation and management, scheduling, dealing with challenges, and more. Do note that today's masterclass is part 2 of a 2-part webinar series, with the first part of the masterclass now available on our YouTube channel. I would like to encourage our audience here today to share their thoughts on this topic and engage with our speaker by using the Q&A box below. And now, with no further ado, I'll now pass the time over to Diana, who's the Corporate Engagement Lead at Albany College of Pharmacy and Health Sciences. Diana, please.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, we can hear you loud and clear.
Okay, great. Thank you, Brian. Thanks, everyone, for joining us tonight, or tonight here, this morning there. I appreciate it, and I encourage you to ask questions, make comments. We'd like to make this as interactive as possible so that you get the most from it that you can. Now I'm going to go over here. Let me see here. Where am I? We're going to be talking about hard skills, but before I launch into those tonight, I wanted to do a couple of follow-ups from part 1, which was week before last. There were some questions, some good questions had come up, and I wanted to provide a little bit more information. One of the questions was, what about Agile, Waterfall, Scrum, et cetera, et cetera? These are all variants of project management or types of project management, different approaches that emphasize different things. So for example, Agile, as you would expect, puts the emphasis on being nimble, quick, small, lean, and moving quickly as possible. They tend to delay decision-making in order to make sure they have as much information as possible. On the other hand, Waterfall, I'm going to go down to the bottom one. Waterfall is front-loaded. They tend to put a lot of emphasis on planning. A lot of engineering firms use Waterfall because of its emphasis on technical detail. Scrum, you probably heard of Scrum Masters. So what those are, what Scrum really is a better method, or at least it's purported to be a better method for product development, in which they fix the time and the cost, not the requirements necessarily. So they say we've got 30 days to develop 3 new variants of this particular technology, whatever that technology might be. So they don't say we have these requirements about new technology. They say here's 30 days, and we need 4 things done in that period of time. And then what can you come up with that will fill the bill? In terms of software, there are a million different software platforms out there. I've listed a couple of the popular ones here. The point I want to emphasize with you, however, is that many large pharma organizations such as Amgen, Genentech, Gilead have developed their own proprietary project management software platforms that tie into their budget systems, that tie into their HR systems, et cetera. So while it's good to know how to work a spreadsheet and Microsoft Project, for example, I wouldn't spend a lot of time on that, because when you go to work for a pharma company, you're probably going to learn their own internal system. A couple of other follow-ups. People asked about different project management groups, and I've listed a couple here that are specifically for the biopharmaceutical industry. The first one is a group that's in the UK, and the second one I'm a little bit more familiar with because I did a few things with them when I was in Southern California. That's Biopharma PM. And then finally, let me see if I can get this to open. People asked about different certifications, and I just want to give you I'm just opening this web page from Project Management Institute, PMI. Let's see if I can get up the top there, just to give you an idea of all the different types of certifications that are available. Now, this is just through PMI. There are other organizations that issue certificates as well. You can see that even if you don't have a lot of experience, there's a whole range of certificates there. More experience. If you want to specialize, Agile, you'll see a number of things there for Agile. Organizational transformation, there's specialty certificates for that. And then finally, if you have a lot of experience, you can go for one of these programs here. So let me get out of here and go back over to where I hope I was. Okay. So if you have any questions about any of that, don't hesitate to put them in the chat box. All righty. So for tonight's discussion, I wanted to go back to the framework of the 5 phases of project management as defined by the Project Management Institute, or PMI. Initiate, plan, execute, monitor and control, and close. And as I said last time, the skills, whether those be hard skills or soft skills, then the attitudes that you need will shift through all of those phases. So while initiate may put a great deal of emphasis on the soft skill of focus, for example, or what I'm going to call tonight the hard skill of knowing your organization. By the time you get down to execute, you're really going to be thinking a lot about being resilient and dealing with difficult people. So these things will shift, and it's good to try to develop as many of these skills and attitudes as possible. So key hard skills for each phase. There are lots and lots of skills that we could talk about for each of these phases, but I thought for purposes of tonight, just to keep it a little more simple and streamlined, agile, if you will, I wanted just to focus on one skill per phase. So we're going to walk through from the initiation, that is the time the project just begins, when management has signed off on it, all the way through the close of the project. And this could be a period of months. It could certainly be a period of years. So each phase is going to require a different kind of attitude, skill, and ability to deal with what is being served up at that point in time. Okay, so the initiation phase, when we are just getting ready to organize the project, I think a key skill that you want to have, a key hard skill that you want to have, is how well do you know that jungle out there? How well do you know the organization? Organizations are very complicated places, and the better that you understand the organization, the better off you will be as a project manager. Whether you're a project team leader or a team member really doesn't matter that much right now. The important thing is to understand the organization. You don't need functional mastery, so you don't need to be the finance guru. You don't need to be the manufacturing maven. But what you really need to understand is the project goal, right? So typically management will tell you what the project goal is going to be. What are they trying to accomplish? But you really need to understand what the implications are for the organization. Management may want to have a new bioprocessing pilot plant built in a certain location, but that location may not want it, right? There could be a pushback from the people who are there already, or there could be a variety of other kinds of challenges. So you really need to understand not simply what is written down on the piece of paper on the charter, but what are the implications for that throughout the organization. And that really is a hard skill that you develop over time. How do the pieces of the project fit together? Who will get these things done for you? Who are the people? What are they like? And finally, what's the history of the organization in general with this kind of a project, and also with project management in general? So if I know the organization, it's going to enable me to do a better job of scoping the project. So the first important step or subject, if you will, of the initiation phase is scoping the project. That is, how big or small will the project be? How much money are we going to put against the project? How much time do we have to work against the project? And then finally, what is the anticipated quality level that we have. And I have an example here from the biopharma industry, our project scope. Here it is in the upper right-hand corner. We're going to change the tertiary packaging. That is the outer box that rare disease lyophilized drug travels in from the factory to the final distribution point, right? So that is that's not an unusual kind of a project for a pharmaceutical company to want to undertake. A lot of money can be lost in product that becomes that does not maintain its required temperature 100% of the time from shipment to delivery. So that's my scope. My quality statement is this about the temperature consistency. Management has given us $2 million for this changeover. So we're going to have to be doing some changes in terms of packaging, in terms of manufacturing, et cetera. And I'm going to go over that in a little more detail in a moment. But that's our budget. That's our piggy bank to do this. And we have about 2 years in which to complete this project. Okay. So that's my scope statement. And this is going to be the key, if you will, or the launch of our pathway into actually executing changed tertiary packaging for lyophilized drug product air shipment. So that's my first hard skill. Do you know the organization? How well do you know the organization? Can you navigate through all of those, that underbrush there, all of those things that are making life interesting, but also complicated. Our second phase in project management is planning. And the key here, or the key hard skill that I suggest is necessary, is what I call back of the envelope mastery. Back of the envelope, what does that mean? Well, we talk about, can you give me a back of the envelope estimate of how long it's going to take for something to be completed? How much time, how much money is it going to cost? How many people am I going to need? You need to be able to quickly and effectively make these kinds of estimates in order to really do a good job on the planning phase. And why is that? Well, a lot of people think like this, we know what we need to do, so we don't need to do any planning. Any road will get us there. We don't know where we're going, but any road will get us there. Or, I'm going around and around in circles. These are the kinds of predicaments we often find ourselves in without some kind of rigor in our planning. So here are some characteristics of a good plan, right? First of all, it's generated by the team. I've been talking pretty much in the singular here about the project manager or the project team leader, but a good plan is always generated by the team, always has input from all of the different members and functions that are represented on the team. It reflects project complexity, right? It has to be not overly detailed, but with enough detail in it so that we can actually do the work. And that's what we mean over here by sized right. And I'm going to talk more about this 4% measure in a minute. But basically, if I think of a project as having 100 units in it, I want to try to break down those units into smaller and smaller little bits of work. And each bit should actually be about 4% of the total. So I've got 25 4% things that I'm going to focus on defining better. And those are the things that are the work units that will be distributed to the team for completion. It's a living document. It relies heavily on good communication. And getting back to our theme here, or this phase anyway, it takes estimating seriously. Because estimating is what you start with. Let me get to my next, whoops. I'll talk a little bit more about estimating in a second, but back of the envelope planning starts out with these kinds of input. So we've already talked about the scope. You've seen the triangle of scope, right? The balance of scope, cost, time, and quality. All of these things have to be met in order for the project to be successful. Many organizations use a thing called the project definition, which is what I would call, for the most part, a narrative description of your scope, often with a little bit of history behind it. The reason why we need to make this change about the tertiary packaging of our lyophilized product. Many companies also use a project charter. The project charter is sort of the official document that comes down from on high from management and says, yes, you are now sanctioned, you are now approved to begin this work. And it will spell out all the members of the team. It will spell out all the stakeholders. It will usually describe any kinds of constraints. So the project is only going to be domestic US, for example. It's only going to be within Singapore. It's going to be global, and other aspects like that. That's the part. Those are inputs that we use to actually develop the plan. So the plan manages the scarce resources that I talked about before, and those being time, cost, quality, human resources, the people that are going to do the work, communications, and risk. So a good project plan will contain these 6 chapters, if you will. All right, well, that all sounds great, but what do we actually do? How do we actually go about doing this? And again, there are many, many ways of doing this, but I think this is a pretty good diagram. First, we're going to break down the work, and I'll show you a work breakdown structure in a second. We're going to provide some qualifiers, or what they call work dimensions, to each of those little 4% packages of work. We'll start to assign the work packages to the team members or to others. You can have other people who do work for the team who are not necessarily formal team members. And they talk about estimating overall time and cost, but I think all items 3 and 4 go in with item number 2. So this is all a little bit of an iterative kind of, or I should say, a looped activity. We break down the work, we do these estimates, and then we probably have to go back and look at our work breakdown structure again. But it is, you get the basic idea of how it proceeds. So the work breakdown structure, I feel, is the unsung hero of project management, because this is really where you say, what are the steps we are going to take? What is the activity that will be the focus of the team over X period of time? It's a graphical representation. I'll show you an example in a second. It subdivides all of the project deliverables into those 4% buckets, or the 4% work packages, as they are often called. It's a great way to capture all the things that have to be done. Remember, we talked last time about starting at the end and working backwards when you're thinking about how to organize your project. And the work breakdown structure works very well with that mode. We use it to estimate how long each work package is going to take. That's the duration. We use it to help us figure out what comes first and what comes second. That's the precedence. And then finally, responsibilities as well as risk assessment. I'm just going to stop here before I go into more details, ask if there are any questions. I see there's a Q&A there. Okay. Sashi, thank you for the questions. Very good one. Is the project manager involved in development of the project charter, or is that derived from senior management? It will depend on the company. I would say in the larger the company and the more formalized the project management process is, the more likely that the charter will come from senior management without the involvement of the project manager. A lot of times, if the organization is quite large and uses project management extensively, they will have a project management office, or a PMO. And sometimes the PMO might be consulted for input onto the charter, but generally the charter is more or less the domain of senior management. Okay, SGInnovate events would like to answer this question live. Okay. All right, I guess you all heard that. I hope you did. Let me go back up here. So we talked about our scope earlier on the tertiary packaging, and the work breakdown structure always should trace back to the scope. So just to remind you, here's sort of a summary of our scope. Changed the tertiary packaging by December 2024 for no more than $2 million. And then I'm going to break this into these 5 components. I've grossly oversimplified this. There's a million other things that you would do in a project of this nature, but I thought just for simplicity, we're going to talk about project components, packaging, manufacturing, supply chain, and regulatory. And again, this is all, even though I'm not using the terms estimating with every slide, this is still all part of estimating, using the back of the envelope to get started on this kind of work. So here's what a work breakdown structure looks like or can look like. It's basically a hierarchy chart. Here's my overall scope. Here are my 5 key components. And then under each of these, I have some further breakdowns. I didn't go to 4% because I'd have to have a screen that was vertical and not horizontal. But you could just imagine that under each of these, I'm going to have a whole bunch of sub work, defined work activities that will then roll back up to satisfy whatever we need to do for supply chain, manufacturing modifications, etc. So I've got my work breakdown structure, I've got my scope, I've got my work breakdown structure. I'm now starting to put all these little, little pieces together of what to build up to the overall project. But I have to be able to estimate time, money, people, and a couple of other things before any of this is going to be particularly useful. So this is where estimating comes in, and in general, you can just start fairly broadly. Just take a, throw a dart at it, and just to get going somewhere, right? So that's what we mean. You just got to start with something. So take your best guess, if it's just a guess. Talk to the people, of course, who are involved with manufacturing or supply chain, and get them to help you make estimates. But you're not, at this stage, you're not necessarily going to be locked down to the final timeline, the final cost, etc. You want to have a certain level of certainty, but in the earlier phases of this kind of work, your certainty level can be less than it will be once you have to really finalize and nail down the project. You want to know what your points estimate are, by which I mean, what's the range of how many breadth of outcomes range and point estimate are fairly similar in that, is it within a kilometer? Is it within $1 million? Or is it within, the next 24 hours? I want to understand the basis for that estimate. Did it come from manufacturing? Did it come from white papers? Did it come from some other source? Did it come from history? And then, what other kinds of factors might affect the validity? Lyophilization is a very complicated process, and to maintain temperatures of below 80 degrees centigrade for a trip that might cover 5,000 miles, how much do we really know about all of the variables that are going to impact that? So it doesn't mean that you have to have absolute validity or absolute certainty about your estimate, but that you have to at least understand what the risks are to it. So we're going to be estimating work, of course. We've already talked a little bit about the WBS. We're going to be talking about our people or our human resources. So how many people do we think will be called upon in order to achieve all of the work that we are starting to unfold? but not only how many people do I need, but how much time does each person have, right? In most cases, a project team or team members may have other responsibilities. They may have responsibilities back to their function or back to their matrix. So they're not working 100% of the time on the project. So I'm going to have to factor in that, you know, my finance head is only available 25% of the time. And so I may need 4 times as many finance people to get the work done. And when is that time available? Are they, you know, if it's end of budgetary cycle, my finance person is not going to be as available as it might be at another time. So I may have to move around some of my estimates in order to accommodate that. We'll talk a little bit about the responsibility accountability matrix later on, but that's a very helpful tool to have when you are thinking about the people who are going to be doing the work and what their kinds of roles will be. We'll be estimating time. You can see the kinds of questions that will be asked for that. We have lots of time scheduling tools available in project management. I'm going to talk about the network diagram in a second. I'll give you a couple of Microsoft project examples also in a minute. Risk is always going to be will always be there, but I need to know how to manage the risk. But first I need to be able to identify what those risks are. That's where the risk matrix is a very, very handy tool. Cost, I've got people costs, I've got equipment costs, I've got supplies costs, other kinds of costs. So I want to be able to tie back my estimates to whatever is the budgeting method we use in our organization. Oh, remember what I said earlier about knowing your organization. So I want to have familiarity with people who are in the accounting department. I want to know what their cycles are for budgeting. I want to understand how they account for different charges, different kinds of things, and where they put different expenses in their overall budget, so that I'm consistent in my reporting and in my tracking with what goes on with the rest of the organization. Okay, we're back to our work breakdown structure, and what I've done here as a very top of the funnel broad estimate is to try to put some or initial timings against some of these components. And I see that I have lost I've lost one of them already, but anyway. So 12/20/12/2024 is emblazoned upon my forehead is when we have to bring all of this to a close. And I'm already racking up 100 days here to deal with FDA, EMEA, Singapore Regulatory Authority, product suitability. Yeah, we have a product on the market already. Is it going to work in this new tertiary packaging? You may say, well, what's not to work? We don't know. We will have to test it, right? Any kind of change like that, of course, requires not only regulatory approval, but scientific approval. So there's some work that needs to be done for quality assurance, if for no other reason, with respect to the product. Manufacturing modifications, I'm probably going to have to make some changes in my facility because I'm going to probably have new packaging equipment that's going to come in at the end of the line, if you will. So we're going to have to look at that, see what changes I might have to make further upstream in order to keep everything running smoothly. I'm putting 120 days for that. I don't know if that's going to be enough. And then for my supply chain, I'm going to have to probably qualify some new air shippers, and that may take a month and a half, something like that. So I'm going to start to put some timing against all of my little work packages. So that's fine. I've got my work broken down. I'm starting to figure out how long everything is going to take, but this is not really a plan. I mean, I can't really act against that. I don't know what order these things have to happen in, right? And that's where sequencing comes in, and that's what we call our network diagram. So I'm going to decide which of these activities comes first, right? Should I start with manufacturing? Should I look at regulatory? Because, manufacturing takes 120 days, but regulatory is almost as long. Maybe I should start them in parallel, blah, blah, blah. So these things are all the kinds of questions that the project manager and the team have to start asking themselves as they are really digging into estimating how the plan is going to be filled out. So what activities must be completed before the next one can begin or others can begin? What activities must be started only before this can begin, and what activities can be concluded simultaneously? So again, I have a super simplified example of a network diagram. And in this case, we started out with product work, right? And then manufacturing, equipment, all of this is manufacturing work. I've got my regulatory dossier somewhere in the middle of all of that. I somehow lost my supply chain people, my air shippers and all those others. That would probably be over here. And then finally, I'm going to go into a launch. As I said, this is super simplified, but it gives you the basic idea of what comes first, what has to be finished before I can move on to the next step. Questions? So we've got our work breakdown structure activities that we have put in our hierarchy, and we're starting to think about the sequence of activities. But this is where a spreadsheet like Microsoft Project is very handy, because now I can put these into the spreadsheet and I can update it. I can change the start and stop dates. I can change the duration. I can change a whole variety of attributes of my activities through the simplicity of a spreadsheet. The Gantt chart, I can use a Gantt chart view to help me keep track of people, tasks, budget, spend, and scheduling. So it's very multifaceted, handy, and it really gives me a good graphical summary of whether or not the plan is actually going to meet the deliverables. Will we make it by December of 2024? And will we be in under $2 million? So this is I apologize for this. This is not the example of the tertiary packaging. It's from another example of a rocket trip to Mars. But you can see that here we have 3 simple activities: validating my rocket, getting my astronauts ready, and then getting my supplies in shape. And you can see how long each of those lasts. And then I can put that into a network diagram view to show me what has to happen first. So here, the rocket validation, these two can be done in parallel. So that might save me a little bit of time instead of having them run sequentially. And then finally, I can track costs through Microsoft Project, or I can set up my budget anyway, and I can track the costs too, for that matter, through Microsoft Project. So I'm taking all of those things that I did more in the back of the envelope now, and I'm putting them into a piece of software. So planning is back of the envelope excellence. Can I estimate time, people, cost, and other aspects of my project? And then can I use those continuously refined to populate additional and more sophisticated tools such as the spreadsheet, network diagrams, et cetera, et cetera. So by this point in time, which is the 3rd phase of project management, we're ready to go. We're ready to launch. We're ready to execute. And I do think that this is a hard skill. It's a very difficult skill, but it's also a hard skill. And you need to be able to keep dozens of plates twirling simultaneously without dropping. So can you do that? Do you know the organization? Do you know how to get things done within the organization? Do you know how to plow roadblocks, etc.? you have some mastery of your estimates, right? So do you know where the slack is in terms of your schedule, so that if you fall behind by a week on the preparing your project preparing your product or testing your product, let's say, for suitability for this particular packaging change, you know, you have a week there of slack, and so you're going to be able to compensate for falling behind by picking up some time there and perhaps in a couple of other spots. Do you understand where you have some room to wiggle on your budget? These are all aspects of having mastery of your estimates. And you have to focus on your deliverables. So if we were to go back, and I'm sorry for this quick backwards glance, but these, you can also look at these, the very bottom line. I never know whether these things are showing up or not. Anyway, the very bottom line of your work breakdown structure, right? So validate fit, equipment readiness, and test tertiary packaging. These can be thought of as deliverables. In fact, each of the work products can be thought of as a deliverable. So do you know what those deliverables are, and do you know what the requirements for each deliverable, each work product are going to be? And that's another way that you can focus on, you know, keep your hands, keep the project, keep your arms around the project. That's the term I'm looking for. And then finally, can you solve problems? So I picked the tertiary packaging example because that's a very real problem with a lot of biopharma companies, a lot of biologics companies, right? So they have to ship their product frozen all over the world in teeny tiny vials. It's very, very difficult to keep them at a constant temperature, and without being at a constant temperature, the product degrades and it is worthless. So these products, as you know, can cost tens, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars. And you can't afford to have a $3 million shipment be tossed because the temperature went out of whack. So biopharma companies have tried a variety of things over the years. Believe it or not, all the way from dry ice through, shipping everything in little refrigerators. But there are problems, there's pros and cons with all of those. And so the project became a project to solve a problem. But then within that, as you go through each of these work products, you're going to discover additional problems. So execute, keeping the plates twirling means I got to solve this problem because that plate is just about to drop. So one way to solve problems, one way to keep your plates twirling, is the use of the responsibility assignment matrix, or RAM, also called RACI. Sometimes it's called RACI. In the bottom bullet, you'll see what that acronym stands for: responsible, who's doing it; accountable, sort of like a supervisor who's consulted. They're not necessarily doing anything or supervising anyone, but they have some subject matter expertise. So you go to them when you have a regulatory issue. I don't understand why the FDA continues to return our most current dossier about the progress we're making on our tertiary packaging change. So I'm going to my regulatory guru to find out some answers. And finally, who needs simply to be informed? A lot of times, line management, functional management of the people who are working on the team just want to know what's going on. They're not going to do anything else, but they need to, as a courtesy or as a way of keeping the wheels greased, they need to be informed. And this is what one looks like. Again, this is sort of an older example. It is not specific to biopharma, of course, but you see here RACI. I've got my 6 team members over here, and then I've got all my tasks here. So the tasks can be the high level parts of my work breakdown structure, which is essentially what this is, or it could be much, much, much more detailed with all 25 work packages broken out, and then each person designated as responsible consulted, accountable, or informed. Okay. By doing this, though, so how does this help me solve problems to keep my plates in twirling around in the air? It's delegation, right? If every person on the team understands what their role is, what they're responsible for, what their job is, then it makes each person more accountable, if you will, for making sure that the job gets done. There's no mystical kind of mystified, who I thought you were doing that. No, I thought you were doing that. These people are taking charge of the components of the project and making sure that they are completed in a quality and professional method. So far, so good. But by delegating, you help keep your plates swirling. Another part of keeping the plates twirling, of course, is like keeping the lights on, which means money. So we have to keep an eye on the budget all the time once we are into the execution phase. Cost overruns can happen in a moment's notice. One minute you think you've got all the money that you need for equipment, and the equipment manufacturer says, well, no, we don't carry that anymore, or no, we've had, inflation is here, and so we have to raise our prices. You can think of 50 other examples of where you can't count on, your money, your budget staying in one spot and being well behaved. So I'm going to start my budget again, going back to my back of the envelope estimating. I'm going to look at my WBS activities, my little 4% things, and I'm going to put a dollar amount against each one where it is reasonable, right? Some things do not require the expenditure of money. They may require time or expertise, but we'll assume for now that most things will require some cash to be put against them. Then I'm going to go back to my project charter. Now, we didn't talk a lot about project charter today. Sashi asked a good question about it. But the project charter will tell me, I'm sorry, not tell me, but pardon me, will tell the team, will inform the team what will be acceptable about what will be acceptable about how regulatory accepts our new type of tertiary packaging, right? So they'll be able to say, regulatory must give it a full thumbs up, or regulatory cannot put up any additional challenges to it, or the regulatory response will be conditional on certain things, and we may have to go back and do some more data collecting and data analysis. Whatever those criteria are, the team needs to understand that, because that's going to impact how much money is going to be needed and how much time the project will take. Any other kinds of assumptions or constraints. So, a constraint might have to do with intellectual property. The company might not want to change its product in order to better fit with the new type of tertiary packaging, because of certain types of intellectual property, certain patent conditions, for example. So there may be certain constraints there that are also going to impact budget, time, and people. And the budget can be time-based. It can be, January, February, March type of budget. It can be activity-based. Here's the budget for manufacturing. Here's the budget for supply chain, et cetera, or it can be both. But if I have my, pardon me, if I have my budget allocated well against my activities, then the budget itself becomes another way that I can sort of keep track of how things are being executed. Is my money going out at the rate that I expected, or is there some big, some big spend over here, spend over there? Well, what's going on? What's happening? So that's another way that the budget is useful in terms of the actual execution phase. Plus, of course, The budget is the blood, right? The fuel that runs the engine. So you need to have money in order to get things done. So I can also use my work breakdown structure, pardon me, to do my initial estimate of a budget. I'm just looking at manufacturing now. I've got all the other components somewhere else. And under manufacturing, I've got facility, equipment, and people. And I'm going to have to upgrade my HVAC, my heating, venting, and air conditioning, because the facility that I want to use for this is, it's getting a little old and needs to have some upgrades done to it. I do need some new equipment, mostly new packaging equipment, but I may need some new fill finish equipment. And then, there's going to be I'm going to have to hire some additional people in order to get all this done. Now, what's wrong with this picture that you see here? Well, I'm already up to $2 million, right? So I've got a million and a million. That's 2 million. That's my total budget just for manufacturing. That doesn't give me any money to spend on product or process product work, product quality assurance work, for example. It doesn't give me any money to qualify my air suppliers to any kind of work that needs to be done on the supply chain side. Regulatory, I may need some cash over there as well. So this is a good example of how an initial estimate, the top of the funnel, the big wide top of the funnel. Now I need to refine it some more. I'm going to have to go back and get all these people who gave me these kind of estimates or helped me with these estimates to go back and skinny them down, because I'm going to have to find some more money for all of the other things that we know are going to happen on the project. So we've talked about initiate. How well do you know the organization? We've talked about planning. Do you have good estimating? Do you have good back of the envelope sort of envisioning of the overall project? We talked about execute. Can you keep all of this stuff going, right? You're going to have lots of tools, helpers, and others to keep everything moving, right? Because you're on a deadline, even though 2 years seems like a long way away. Believe me, it's not. So I got to keep moving towards that deadline, but I can't let my spending overtake my timing. So in addition to the things that I've mentioned so far about helping you to sort of keep control of the project, there's also a whole number of things that you can do in monitoring and controlling your project. And that key hard skill is what I call detailomania. Are you attentive to detail? And I think this is where quality plays a big role, because quality is about detail, and you can use your quality measures for controlling and monitoring what happens in the project. So yes, certainly you're doing it if you're doing quality for customer satisfaction, right? This is an internal project and you want to please your internal customers, but hopefully your external customers will be thrilled with it as well, because they will have a higher percentage, a higher probability of receiving good quality product for their needs of helping people to fight off illnesses and diseases. So I use quality in its original sense, but I also use quality measures as a way to assure and control the process itself. And we're trying to build quality in. And I can do that by going back to my responsibility accountability matrix and all of the roles that the people on the team play, and give each of them quality metrics in addition to their deliverables and the other things for which they are responsible. So I as the project manager, now I'm going to wear my project manager hat. I, as the project manager, may pick 1 or 2 key indicators. I may say that, I'm going to be just totally focused on how the package testing worked out in some supply chain, in some real life supply chain situations, were we able to maintain 100% temperature control? That's going to be my particular metric, and I'm going to sort of watch that as the project proceeds, right? Well, I might not have anything to do with that at the very beginning of the project because we haven't gotten to that stage yet, but by the time we get there, I'm going to be ready to track that. But then I'm going to delegate other quality metrics to the rest of the team, and we're going to make sure that we report on these quality metrics at every team meeting. So quality is not something you think, oh, at the end, yes, it's just lovely and it works just fine, but it's something that we're going to look at every week if we have weekly meetings. And I think that I'm a sort of a meeting maven, but I think that the more meetings you have and the more you can keep them efficient, the better off you will be. Okay, I have about 10 minutes left, and I'm going to just sort of go through the rest. Monitoring control by regularly checking our risks. So project managers are often the world's best worriers, right? They always look for things that can go wrong. So the WBS is a great starting point. If you look down to next to the last bullet here, WBS, I can poke around my WBS rectangles, work packages, and say, what could possibly go wrong here? What could possibly go wrong there? What could go wrong when that new HVAC that is going to cost us $500,000 is installed, right? What are all the things that could happen? But then how am I going to manage it? And that technique is called, or that tool is called a risk management matrix. And what I want to do is look at every risk in terms of how likely is it, that in terms of its probability to happen, and then its impact, right? So if I have some rare thing, and the asteroid hitting Earth, despite what happened last week with the shooting it down, and it's a teeny tiny asteroid, let's say, just go with me for a second. That might be a trivial impact, and that would be a very rare kind of an occurrence, and that would be a low probability or a low risk. So I can look at everything in the work breakdown structure, and I can assign it low, medium, or high risk. Usually in an organization, the low risks will be things that we'll just deal with it when it happens. If and when it happens, we will deal with it. The medium risks, I'm going to probably try to keep them from happening and mitigate the impact of them. And then the high risks, I'm going to certainly try to keep them from occurring. And if they do occur, I'm going to have a really good backup plan as to how we're going to recover from them. Okay, here's another question. In a research project, the project keeps changing based on the results from previous steps. How should the project be planned and monitored? So let's see, I'm going to answer that live. That's a very good question. It's a very real life question and it's also what you, in a way, want to have happen on a project, right? So you do things, you get information, and you modify. So this is why we start doing estimates very, very broadly, and we try to narrow them down as we go through time. I would say, how should the project be planned and monitored? For those kind of gates, right? If you're familiar with the term of a gate, of a gatehouse or a gate. So I have a series of activities, research activities, let's say. Maybe these research activities go up through bench scale flasks, whatever your molecule might be. But it's strictly bench scale work. And then at the end of that, when I've achieved my goals at the bench, we're gonna use a gate type structure to make a decision. Do we go forward under decisions A, B, and C, A, B, or C, or do we go backwards? And if we go to A, then here's the path for A, here's the path for B, here's the path for C. Then my next phase might take me to animal studies. And again, when I reach the end of my animal studies, I'm going to have a series of decisions to make. So it's sort of like a decision tree type of a project. And I have to estimate how much time I'm going to allow for each of these phases, and how much money and how much manpower or woman power I'm going to allow for each of these phases. I hope that helps. I can talk more about that offline. I don't want to take up a lot of my time, a lot of our time, and that. Okay. All right. So finally, fifth part of project management phase is the closing phase. It may seem silly. Oh, well, we're done. We're finished. Why do I have to do that? But it's very important to close out a project because of the learning that you want to retain from it, right? So you don't want to have to go back and make all your mistakes all over again, right? You want to retain as much of the lesson about how the project was managed as you possibly can. What have you learned? What has the team learned? Are you going to be able to document them? You always want to be in learning mode, because this is what separates the ordinary project manager from the great project manager. So that's all I have to tell you tonight about hard skills for project management. I thank you very much for your time. Here is my contact information. I'm happy to answer any other questions if we have time, or don't hesitate to email me if you would like. Let's see, is this the same question? Okay, I think we've done that. Brian, back to you.
Thank you so much, Diana. I think I can speak on SGInnovate's behalf to say that it was a pleasure to have an expert like yourself here today to share your knowledge with us on such an important topic. Thank you all to our audience today as well for submitting your question for Diana. Do also take note that we'll be sending out a link to the recording for this session in our newsletters as well, and we'll be uploading the recording onto our YouTube page. So do keep an eye out for that. And with that, we've come to the end of our masterclass today. Thank you for spending your Tuesday morning with us. And on behalf of SGInnovate, I would like to wish you all a great week ahead, and we look forward to seeing you again at our next event. Thank you, everyone, and goodbye.
Bye.
Thank you so much, Diana.
Thank you.